The 58th State Senate District includes much of the Southern Tier and portions of the Finger Lakes District, including Ithaca, Watkins Glen, and Elmira. Republican State Senator Tom O'Mara, who is the chair of the Environmental Conservation Committee, currently holds the seat, but he's being challenged by Leslie Danks Burke, an attorney, a mother of two, and an economic development advocate. Leslie is the daughter of farmers. She's also a founding chairperson of the political advocacy network for Planned Parenthood of the Southern Finger Lakes and a member of the statewide board of directors of Planned Parenthood Advocates of New York, PPANY. Leslie Danks Burke, welcome to the Capitol Press Room.
Thanks so much for having me.
So why are you running?
I am running because it's high time for our fair share in the Southern Tier and the Finger Lakes. And I live there and I'm raising my two wonderful daughters there. And like every parent, I want to see the best future possible for my kids and for all the kids in our region. And right now, our advocates in Albany are not garnering that for us.
Assuming you're talking at least in part about Roe v. Wade?
Well, I am talking in part about that. I certainly was one of the very loud voices in our region about the 10-plank women's equality agenda, which 9 of those planks were passed. And unfortunately, New York State still does not recognize federal law in New York State law. And I think that's a real problem.
So in terms of the GOP's argument against passing the codification of Roe, it's sort of a two-tiered argument. The first is that codification would make abortion more accessible. And the second is, hey, it's New York. Who would ever think that New York wouldn't have legal access to abortion?
I think that's a really interesting point that you make there. And certainly we're seeing a rollback of reproductive health care access across the country. And a lot of folks think that that wouldn't happen in New York State, but it is beginning to happen in New York State. And when we have a state like ours who refuses to pass legislation that puts into law what is already established federal law, that becomes a real problem in my view. And I think that New York State needs to get with the program. What
about that it would make abortion more accessible? How do you respond to that?
That's absolutely incorrect. Abortion is already accessible, was accessible, has been accessible for millennia. Women have been obtaining abortions for decades, hundreds of years. All this does is make sure that they obtain abortions in safe, clean, and legal circumstances.
So what are some other issues that are important to you personally? I mean, obviously, reproductive rights. What else?
For me, the real issues in our district are jobs, farms, and schools. And like I said, when we first started chatting here, I am in this because I see my children's future not being protected by the advocates that we have in the state Senate right now. And I want to see that change. I want to see my children go to schools that offer the best that New York State has to offer. I want to see my children have access to jobs when they graduate. I want to see them graduate from those schools, and I want those jobs to be in my home region because my children deserve the same opportunity that any other New York State children have.
So let's start with schools because that's where it all begins, with education. What would you fight for if you won this office and came to Albany?
First off, we have to look at the funding measures that have been in place in New York State for decades and that shortchange rural school districts. And that's a real concern of mine.
So you would advocate for changing how the school aid distribution formula works?
Yes. Right now, the rural school districts do not have access to the same funds that other urban school districts have access to, and that becomes a real problem. Certainly, I'm in favor of the so-called elimination of the GEA that happened last year. That's a step in the right direction, but it was too little too late, and we need to move faster than that.
Do you believe that the state is owed money from the legislature regarding the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit? Some advocates for education say that the school districts are owed billions of dollars, $4 billion, I believe is the number at this point.
I think the bigger question there is not who owes who, but whether we're getting the problem solved and whether the children are being educated in the classrooms. And right now, when we look at children who do not have access to the same level of education that children all across the country and certainly all across New York State should have access to, that's a problem we need to start remedying.
You are running against the chairman of the Environmental Conservation Committee. Are there any decisions that he's made as chair that you feel feel should be examined with a closer microscope?
Well, absolutely. One example is that last year, Senator O'Mara put to bed certain legislation that would have addressed microbeads.
Put to bed meaning he shunted it off to the side, or
exactly through the calendar process, he was able to make sure that New York State did not pass microbeads legislation that would have protected our water from microbeads that everybody on both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, everyone agrees are a real problem.
He was on this program saying that he felt that he needed to save jobs at a certain plastic plant that might be in his district.
I think that we need to look at jobs in the aggregate. And if the microbeads are going in there and going into my children's drinking water and going into everybody's drinking water, we need to take a look at the problems that's presenting for people all across the district.
Drinking water is a big issue.
It's a big issue where I come from, absolutely.
So what do you think the state should do about it?
Well, let me tell you that in February, a note came home from my children's school that said that plastic bags were going on top of all of the drinking fountains and all the wash basins in the classrooms. And
that made you feel good.
It deeply concerns me as a parent to know that my children can no longer drink the water in their school and can no longer wash their hands in it because of the lead danger and the lead that's present in that water. That lead has been there for a long time. This is not a new problem. It's an infrastructure problem that the state and that the school district should have been able to deal with a long time ago. And now, because it's become a political crisis, we're beginning to talk about it. But we've got to do a lot more than talk.
What do you suggest that we do? I believe that Tom O'Mara is the co-sponsor of legislation that would address this issue.
Well, I don't think it addresses the issue. I think that it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't solve the problem. What Senator O'Mara's legislation did is it created a mandate for all schools to test water that's coming out of their schools. There's no provision in that legislation for what happens after lead is found. And in fact, the legislation doesn't address a lot of schools. It addresses public schools, but it doesn't address daycares, nursery schools. It doesn't address parochial or private schools, and that's a real problem.
Today we had some big news out of the Public Service Commission. They are pushing the governor's clean energy standard, and they voted on it and gave it the thumbs up. Part of that, though, is using taxpayer monies to subsidize upstate nuclear power plants. And I'm wondering how you feel about that coming from upstate.
One of the things that we need to do in the Southern Tier and Finger Lakes is really address green power opportunities. There's a real solar initiative happening in my region. There's a solar Steuben and a solar Tompkins initiative that are really building and growing. I want to see investment in those opportunities. I want to see solar panels built in the Southern Tier. I want to see a move away from fossil fuel dependent infrastructure and toward green energy, because that's the future and that's how we're going to get people back to work.
I was going to ask you about the storage of liquid natural gas under or adjacent to the Seneca Lake and the salt caverns. Do you have a position on that?
And again, that's something that people on both sides of the aisle are very opposed to. I know that there's a lot of Republican-leaning farmers. My parents are farmers. I have seen what's happened with fossil fuel dependence in my parents' area of farming, and I don't want to see that happen in the Southern Tier and the Finger Lakes. It's a real problem.
I got so excited about you talking about green power. I didn't get your answer regarding using taxpayer money to subsidize upstate nuclear power plants. Is that yes, you agree that we should do that, or a no?
I think it's something that we need to look into, but I don't think that we can make a definitive answer on that yet.
Well, it's going to happen pretty soon. I mean, I think that the PSC is saying, yes, we're doing it. Any comment?
No comment on that.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your family life, and then we'll say goodbye.
So I'm the mom of two young daughters. I have a daughter who's about to go into 7th grade and another daughter who is about to go into 2nd grade. And I'm married to a wonderful guy. We live in Ithaca, New York, and we love the Southern Tier and the Finger Lakes, and it's our home, and we want to see it be the best it can possibly be.
Tell Savante we said hello.
Will do. Thanks.
We have been speaking with Leslie Danks Burke. She is challenging Tom O'Mara for the 58th State Senate seat in November. And for more information, you can visit her website, which is leslieforsenate.com.
All spelled out. FORSENATE.com.
leslieforsenate.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.